Thrown out by my own son, I ended up sleeping under a bridge in the middle of a storm. That's when a widowed billionaire found me and changed everything. 15 years earlier, I'd been the cook in his parents' mansion. When he took me into his home, he gave me one strict rule: never go into my daughter's room. She's been depressed since her mother died. He went away on a business trip. A week later, he came back to find his little girl and me in the kitchen, covered in flour and singing at the top of our lungs. What he did after that moment turned all of our lives upside down. I'm grateful you're here with me. Stay with my story until the end, and leave a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story travels. The rain was pounding so hard I could barely see through the windshield when I pulled into Hugo's driveway. My hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from what I was about to do. At 62 years old, I had finally reached my breaking point. I'd been carrying this secret for 15 years, and tonight I couldn't carry it any longer. Hugo opened the door before I even had the chance to knock, his expression already twisted into that familiar look of annoyance. He was 37 now, tall like the man who'd raised him, but where David had been gentle, Hugo seemed made of nothing but resentment. "What do you want, Mom?" he asked in a flat voice. No hello, no concern that I'd driven through a storm to get there. "We need to talk." I stepped inside without waiting to be invited. The house was a disaster. Empty beer bottles cluttered the coffee table. Takeout containers were strewn across the furniture. The air felt heavy, stale, like the whole place smelled of failure. Hugo slammed the door harder than necessary. "If this is about money again, I already told you." "It's not about money." I turned to face him, my heart pounding against my ribs. "It's about the truth. About your father." Something flickered in his eyes. Fear, maybe. "What about Dad?" I had rehearsed this conversation hundreds of times in my head, but standing there, staring at my son's cold, angry face, the words felt like glass cutting my throat. "David wasn't your biological father." The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the room itself stopped breathing. Hugo stared at me as if I'd physically struck him. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky and the lights flickered. "That's impossible," he whispered. "You're lying." "I'm not lying." I reached into my purse and pulled out the DNA test I'd been carrying for 3 months. "I had this done. I needed to be absolutely sure before I told you." Hugo snatched the papers from my hand and scanned the clinical lines of text that confirmed what I'd suspected for years. The man listed on his birth certificate, my late husband David, showed a 0% probability of being his father. "This is fake." He crushed the papers in his fist. "You made this up." "Hugo, please. Who is it then?" His voice was rising now, filled with the fury I'd watched build in him over the years. "Who's my real father? Some random guy you cheated with?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of a decade and a half of silence pressing down on me. "His name was James Barrett," I said quietly. He was my employer's son. I worked as a cook for his family." Hugo gave a harsh, bitter laugh. "Of course, a cook. So my real father is some rich jerk who couldn't even bother to acknowledge me?" "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Mom?" He stepped in closer, and I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "Tell me exactly how it happened. Tell me how you got pregnant by some rich boy and then lied to Dad for his entire life." My throat burned. James was 19. I was 32. His parents had just hired me, and he was home from college for the summer. He was kind to me when no one else was. I was lonely. Your father and I were going through a rough time. And James, he made me feel seen. "So you had an affair?" "It was one night," I whispered. "One stupid, unforgivable night. I regretted it immediately, and then I found out I was pregnant." Hugo began pacing, running his hands through his hair. "And you never told him? You never told me?" "James went back to college. His parents made it clear I was just the help. When I told them I was leaving, they were relieved to see me go. I went back to your father and tried to pretend it had never happened. "But Dad raised me," Hugo said, his voice cracking. "He loved me." "He did love you, more than anything." Tears were streaming down my face. David was a good man, the best man I ever knew. He deserved better than the lies I told him. Hugo stopped and stared at me, his eyes full of hurt and rage. "You ruined his life. You made him raise another man's child and never told him the truth." "I know." The admission felt poisonous on my tongue. "I've lived with that guilt every single day since he died. That's why I'm telling you now. You have a right to know." "A right to know," Hugo repeated, his voice rising again. 15 years after Dad's funeral, you suddenly decide I have a right to know. Where was that right when I was a kid, when I thought I had a father who loved me?" "He did love you," I insisted, based on a lie. Hugo slammed his fist into the wall and I flinched. Everything was a lie. My childhood, my family, my identity, none of it was real. I wanted to reach for him, to pull him into my arms the way I had when he was little and woke up screaming from nightmares. But those days were gone. Hugo had been drifting away from me ever since David died, leaving us with nothing but debts and the ruins of our life. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words feeling small and useless. "I'm so sorry, Hugo." Sorry doesn't fix this. He was trembling now, whether from anger or shock I couldn't tell. "Sorry doesn't bring Dad back," he said. "Sorry doesn't give me back the 15 years I spent wondering why I never fit anywhere." His words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean I never looked like him. I never acted like him. I never felt like his son." Hugo's voice was splintering. "And now I know why, because I'm not his son. I'm the son of some stranger who probably doesn't even remember your name." "Hugo! Get out!" The words were quiet, but they slammed into me harder than any shout. "What?" "Get out of my house." He still wouldn't look at me. "I don't want to see you again." "You don't mean that," I whispered. "I mean every word." He finally met my gaze, and what I saw there turned my blood to ice. "You've lied to me my entire life," he said. "You let me worship a dead man who wasn't even my father. You took away any chance I had to know my real family." "Please, let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," he snapped. "You made your choice 37 years ago when you built my life on a lie. Now you get to live with it." He walked to the front door and pulled it open. The storm outside had only grown worse. Rain slashed across the porch in violent sheets. "Hugo, I have nowhere else to go," I said, panic creeping into my voice. "That's not my problem anymore." His tone was glacial. "You're not my mother. We're not family. We never were." The words hit so hard I could barely breathe. I stood there for a moment, waiting, hoping he would take it back, that I'd see even a flicker of the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. But that little boy was gone. He'd been gone for a long time. I walked to the door on unsteady legs. "I love you," I whispered. Hugo didn't answer. He just closed the door in my face, and I heard the deadbolt slide into place. The storm was roaring now, the wind so fierce it nearly knocked me off balance. My car refused to start. The engine wheezed and died over and over. I tried calling a cab, but my phone showed no signal, so I started walking. By the time I reached the bridge on Riverside Drive, I was soaked to the skin and shaking uncontrollably. My legs finally gave out, and I crumpled onto the concrete path under the overpass. Rain hammered all around me as I pulled my thin jacket tighter, knowing it wouldn't help. This was how I was going to die, I thought. Alone under a bridge, rejected by the only family I had left. I must have blacked out, because the next thing I heard was a man's voice cutting through the storm. "Ma'am, ma'am, can you hear me?" I forced my eyes open and saw a man kneeling beside me, rain streaming down his face. He looked to be around 50, with silver hair and kind, worried brown eyes. "We need to get you out of this weather," he said gently. "Can you walk?" I tried to answer but only managed a rasp. He helped me to my feet, practically carrying me toward a sleek black car parked nearby. "I'm taking you somewhere warm," he said as he eased me into the passenger seat. "My name is Barrett. What's yours?" Barrett. Even through the fog of cold and exhaustion, that name jolted through me like an electric shock. It couldn't be. Not after all these years. "Marion," I whispered. If the name meant anything to him, he didn't show it. He just nodded and started the engine. As we drove through the storm-dark streets, I watched his profile in the glow of the dashboard. The boy I'd known 15 years ago had grown into a man, successful, judging by the car and his clothes, and he had no idea that the woman he was rescuing had once given birth to his son. Barrett's home was nothing like the one I remembered. 15 years earlier, the Barrett estate had been grand but old-fashioned. Heavy wood, thick carpets, furniture that whispered of old money and older rules. Now, as he led me through the front door, I saw polished marble floors, sleek modern art, and floor-to-ceiling windows that would have offered a breathtaking view of the city if it hadn't been for the storm. "Let me get you some dry clothes," Barrett said, his tone gentle but distant, the way someone might talk to a stray animal brought in from the rain. I stood there dripping in his immaculate foyer, feeling completely out of place. Water pooled around my shoes on the expensive marble, and I wanted to sink straight through the floor. "I should go," I managed through chattering teeth. "I don't want to be a burden." "Nonsense." Barrett was already disappearing down the hallway. "You're hypothermic. We need to get your body temperature up before we worry about anything else." He returned with a folded stack of clothes, soft sweatpants, a thick sweater, warm socks, women's clothes. "These were my wife's," he said quietly, and something in his voice made me look up, past tense. "She was about your size. The bathroom's just down the hall." In the bathroom, as I changed into the dry clothes, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked older than 62, eroded by years of anxiety and the shock of this night. My gray hair clung in wet strands to my face, and my eyes were swollen and red from crying. This was not how I'd ever imagined seeing Barrett again. When I stepped back out, he was waiting with a mug of coffee, real coffee, not the instant kind I'd been drinking since David died. The heat of the cup in my hands made my throat tighten with fresh tears. "Better?" Barrett asked, sitting across from me in what I assumed was the living room. Everything around us was immaculate, expensive, and somehow hollow. "Thank you," I said, taking a sip and feeling warmth spread slowly through my body. "I don't know how I can ever repay you for this." "You don't owe me anything," he replied. Barrett studied my face, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of recognition, but then he looked away. "What happened tonight? Why were you out in the storm?" It was the question I'd been dreading. How do you explain to a stranger that your whole life has just collapsed? That the son you sacrificed everything for has just cut you out of his world? "Family troubles," I said at last. It wasn't a lie, just far from the whole truth. Barrett nodded slowly. "I understand family troubles." Something in his voice made me look at him again. He was staring down at his coffee cup, his jaw clenched with a private kind of pain. "Do you have family?" I asked softly. "A daughter." His answer came out tight. "Emma. She's 17. The age hit me like a punch. Hugo was 37. If Barrett had a 17-year-old daughter. "She's been having a hard time since her mother died," he continued, seeming not to notice my reaction. 6 months ago. Car accident. I'm so sorry for your loss." The words felt painfully inadequate, but I had nothing else to offer. "Emma blames herself," Barrett said. "They argued that morning, before it happened. She hasn't said more than a few words to me since the funeral." He looked up at me, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. "I've tried everything. Therapists, support groups, medication. Nothing gets through." I wanted to tell him that grief had its own cruel schedule, that pushing too hard could make things worse. But I wasn't his friend or his advisor. I was just a woman he'd pulled out of a storm. "It's late," Barrett said, glancing at his watch. "You can stay in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do next." "I can't." "You can, and you will." His tone was firm, but not unkind. "It's not safe for you to be out tonight." As Barrett led me up the sweeping staircase, I caught myself tracing the lines of the house. The hallway looked different, walls removed, open spaces where there used to be doors, but the bones of the place were the same. I'd spent 6 months in the kitchen below, cooking for Barrett's parents while he was away at college. James Barrett Sr. had been demanding and exacting about food, dismissive of the staff. His wife was gentler but distant, treating me like a useful object rather than a person. And then James Jr., Barrett, had come home for the summer. He'd been 19 then, with sandy hair and an easy smile. Unlike his parents, he actually spoke to me, asked about my life, my thoughts on the books he was reading for his literature classes. For the first time in years, I'd felt intelligent, worthy, seen in a way David had never managed. One night, while his parents were at some charity gala, Barrett found me crying alone in the kitchen. David and I had been fighting constantly about money, his drinking, the growing gap between us. Barrett listened, really listened. Somehow we ended up talking until dawn, about everything and nothing. That was the night Hugo was conceived. "This is the guest room," Barrett said, opening a door at the end of the hall. "There's an ensuite bathroom, and you should find everything you need." The room was lovely, all soft blues and whites, with a window that would overlook the gardens once daylight returned. But my attention drifted to the closed door across the hall. "That's Emma's room," Barrett said quietly, following my gaze. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. "She doesn't like to be disturbed. I'd appreciate it if you respected that." I nodded, but there was something in his eyes that made me look closer. This wasn't just a protective father. There was fear there, and desperation. "She's struggling that badly?" I asked. Barrett's shoulders slumped. "She hasn't eaten a full meal in weeks. She barely leaves her room except for school, and even that's becoming less frequent. Her therapist says she's showing signs of severe depression, but Emma won't talk to anyone." My heart ached for both of them. I'd watched Hugo wrestle with his sense of self for years. At least he had fought, shouted, felt something. A teenager who had gone numb, who had stopped feeling altogether, was far more terrifying. "I should let you get some rest," Barrett said softly. "There are extra blankets in the closet if you get cold." After he left, I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of everything. 6 hours ago, I had been preparing to tell my son the truth about his parentage. Now I was in the house of his biological father, a man who didn't recognize me and who was drowning in his own family crisis. The universe had a vicious sense of irony. I was about to switch off the lamp when I heard it, a soft, broken crying from across the hall. "Emma." The sound was raw, filled with the kind of pain that only comes from losing someone you love. I knew that sound. I'd made it myself the night David died, and again tonight when Hugo turned his back on me. Barrett had asked me not to disturb her, but every maternal instinct I had was begging me to go to her. This was exactly the sort of crossroads where I'd always failed Hugo, staying polite instead of pushing through, respecting boundaries instead of showing up, even when it was uncomfortable. But Emma wasn't my child. I was a stranger in this house, relying entirely on Barrett's kindness. The last thing I should do was push too far. The crying went on, and I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to shut it out. But the sound seemed to bleed through the walls, through my defenses, straight into that soft, foolish part of my heart that had always cared too much. Tomorrow, Barrett would probably drive me to a shelter or help me find a cheap room somewhere. Tonight might be the only chance I ever had to help Emma in a way I'd never managed to help Hugo. I was still arguing with myself when the crying suddenly stopped, replaced by a heavy, ominous silence that somehow felt worse than the tears. I hesitated, my hand hovering inches from the door. That sudden silence on the other side of the wall terrified me more than the crying had, but doubt clawed at me. What if I was wrong? What if going to her only made things worse? What if Barrett found out and threw me back into the storm? Then I saw Hugo's face in my mind. His eyes when he told me to get out. I thought about all the years of distance and resentment between us, all the times I'd chosen safety over connection. I couldn't make the same mistake again. I took a breath and knocked softly on Emma's door, my heart pounding. "Go away, Dad," she said. Her voice was hoarse and exhausted. "It's not your father," I answered quietly. "It's Marion, the woman he brought home tonight." There was a long stretch of silence. Then I heard footsteps and the door opened a crack, revealing one brown eye framed by a tangle of dark hair. "What do you want?" Emma's voice was flat, empty. "I heard you crying," I said gently. "I thought maybe you could use some company." She looked me over, my borrowed clothes, my still damp hair. "You're the lady he found in the storm," she said. "That's right." I kept my tone calm and non-threatening. Sometimes it helps to talk to someone who isn't family, someone who doesn't come with expectations. Another pause. Then the door opened wider. Emma stood there, a girl who looked like she hadn't truly slept in weeks. She was tall like her father, with his dark hair and serious eyes, but where Barrett carried himself with quiet authority, Emma looked like she was folding inward, trying to disappear. "I guess you can come in," she muttered. Her room felt like a shrine to a life that had been abruptly put on pause. Dance trophies lined the shelves. Photos showed a smiling girl with friends and with her parents. A violin case sat abandoned in the corner, unopened and dust-covered. Everything had a faint film over it, as if time had stopped the day her mother died. Emma climbed onto her unmade bed and pulled her knees to her chest. "Dad probably told you I'm crazy," she said. "He told me you're grieving," I replied. "That's not the same thing." Emma let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "Everyone keeps saying that. Like grief is some normal process with stages and charts. Like if I just follow the instructions, I'll magically be fine again." I eased myself into the chair at her desk, careful not to disturb the worksheet spread across it, untouched for who knew how long. "What do you think?" I asked. "I think some things can't be fixed," she whispered. "I think some mistakes are too big to forgive." The pain in her voice was so familiar it made my chest ache. "What mistake?" I asked quietly. Emma was silent for so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then the words burst out of her in a rush, like they'd been trapped inside for months. "We argued that morning about college," she said. "Mom wanted me to apply to Juilliard for violin. I wanted to study veterinary medicine. She said I was throwing away my gift, that I didn't understand how rare my talent was." Emma scrubbed at her nose with her sleeve. "I told her I hated the violin," she said. "I told her I only played because she forced me to. I told her I was done pretending to be someone I wasn't, just to make her proud." I could see exactly where this was going, and my heart broke for her, for the weight of words she could never take back. "She left angry," Emma continued. "She was supposed to pick me up from school that afternoon, but she texted that she needed space to think. She was driving to my aunt's place when the truck ran the red light." The silence that followed was thick with guilt and grief and all the impossible wishes to rewind time. "You know it wasn't your fault?" I said softly. "Everyone says that," Emma snapped, "but you weren't there. You didn't see her face when I said I hated the thing she loved most. You didn't see how hurt she was." "No," I admitted. "I wasn't there, but I know what it feels like to carry guilt that's too heavy to set down." Emma looked up at me properly for the first time since I'd entered, her eyes raw and searching. "What do you mean?" she asked. I thought of Hugo's face when I told him the truth about his father. Of 37 years of secrecy ending in him banishing me from his life. Of all the ways I had failed as a mother. "I have a son," I said slowly. "Had a son." Her brow furrowed. "Tonight I told him something I should have told him years ago," I went on, "and he decided he never wants to see me again." "What did you tell him?" she asked. The question was so open, so direct, that for a moment I almost gave her the whole story. But she was a child. This wasn't her burden. "Something about his father," I said instead. "Something that changed how he saw his entire life." I held her gaze. I thought I was protecting him by keeping it hidden. But secrets have a way of turning into poison. Emma studied my face like she was trying to read the truth between my wrinkles. "Do you regret telling him?" she asked. "I regret waiting so long," I said. "I regret all the years we lost because I was afraid of the truth, but I don't regret being honest. Not now." "At least you tried to fix it," Emma said, her voice breaking. "At least you were brave enough to say it out loud. I can't fix anything. I can't unsay what I said. I can't tell my mom I'm sorry. I can't tell her I didn't mean it, that I was just scared of letting her down." I wanted to cross the room and pull her into a hug, but I could feel how fragile this moment was. Too much, too soon, and she might shut down completely. "Your mother knew you loved her," I said instead. "Mothers always know, even when their children say terrible things in anger." "How can you be so sure?" she whispered. "Because I was a mother who heard terrible things in anger," I replied, "and I never doubted that my son loved me, even when he swore he didn't." Emma absorbed that, eyes distant, as if she was testing my words against her memories. "What happened to your husband?" she asked suddenly. "Your son's father." The abrupt change of subject caught me off guard. "He died 6 years ago," I said. "Heart attack." "Do you miss him?" she asked. The question was heavier than she realized, tangled up with guilt and betrayal and love that had never quite been enough. Did I miss David? The man who'd raised Hugo as his own without a single doubt. The man who never once questioned whether Hugo was really his. The man who loved me in spite of my secrets. "Every day," I said honestly, "but missing someone isn't the same as regretting the life you had with them." Emma stared at her hands. "I keep thinking about all the things I should have said differently, all the ways I could have been a better daughter. And I keep thinking about all the ways I could have been a better mother," I admitted. "But replaying it over and over doesn't change anything. At some point, you have to decide whether you're going to let the guilt destroy you, or whether you're going to find a way to honor the person you lost." Emma was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. "How do you honor someone when you can't apologize to them?" "Maybe by becoming the person they always believed you could be," I said. "Maybe by living the life they wanted for you, even if it looks different from what they imagined." "Mom wanted me to be a musician," she murmured. "But what do you want?" For the first time since I'd walked into her room, Emma smiled. It was faint and tinged with sadness, but it was real. "I want to help animals," she said. "I've wanted to be a veterinarian since I was 8. "Then maybe honoring your mother means having the courage to follow that dream," I said gently, "even if it's not the path she would have chosen for you." We talked until nearly 3 in the morning. Emma told me about her mother, a former concert pianist who had given up her career to raise her and to support Barrett while he built his business. She talked about the pressure to be perfect, to make every sacrifice worth it. She told me about friends who drifted away after the funeral because they didn't know how to handle her grief. In return, I told her about Hugo's childhood, about what it was like to raise a son alone after David died. I told her about the loneliness of widowhood, about the fear of having no one to share decisions with, no one to say, "We'll figure this out together." I didn't mention Hugo's true parentage. That wound was still too raw, too tangled. When Emma finally started to yawn, I rose to leave. "Thank you for letting me in," I said. "Sometimes we all just need someone to listen." "Will you still be here tomorrow?" she asked. Her tone was casual, but I heard the hope underneath it. "I don't know," I admitted. "That's up to your father." Emma nodded, but something in her expression had changed. She seemed less crushed, more contemplative. "Marion, do you know how to cook?" she asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "Yes," I said. "Why?" "Mom used to make these amazing blueberry pancakes," Emma said. "Dad's tried a few times, but they never taste right. I haven't had a real breakfast in months." My heart tightened. "I'd be happy to make you breakfast if your father doesn't mind." "He won't mind," she said. He's been trying to get me to eat more for weeks." After I left Emma's room, I lay awake in the guest bed, replaying our conversation. She reminded me of myself at her age, desperate to live up to everyone's expectations, terrified of disappointing the people she loved. But she also reminded me of Barrett at 19, that same earnestness, that same need to do the right thing even when it hurt. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Barrett moving around downstairs. When I went to the kitchen, I found him at the coffee maker in a suit that probably cost more than I'd made in a month back when I worked for his parents. "Good morning," he said, clearly surprised to see me. "I hope you slept well." "I did. Thank you again for your kindness." I hesitated, then decided not to dance around it. "I talked to Emma last night." Barrett's whole body went tense. "What do you mean you talked to her?" "She was crying," I said. "I knocked on her door and she let me in. We talked for a few hours." "I specifically asked you not to disturb her," Barrett said. His voice had gone cold and formal, the same clipped tone his father used to use with the staff. "I know, and I'm sorry I ignored that," I replied. "But she needed someone to listen, and sometimes it's easier to talk to a stranger." Barrett set his coffee cup down harder than he needed to. "Emma is my daughter," he said. "Her care is my responsibility." "Of course it is," I said quickly. "I wasn't trying to take that from you. I was only trying to help a young woman who's clearly in a lot of pain." "And you think you know what's best for her after one conversation?" he shot back. The words stung because there was some truth in them. I had overstepped. I had made assumptions. But I'd also seen something in Emma that he seemed to be missing. "I think she needs to hear that it's okay to grieve in her own way," I said carefully, "and I think she needs to know that her mother's death wasn't her fault." "Her therapist has told her that repeatedly," Barrett said. "Sometimes kids need to hear it from someone who isn't being paid," I answered gently. Barrett stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the battle in his eyes, anger wrestling with something softer. "Hope, maybe. Did she actually talk to you?" he asked at last. "More than a few words?" "Yes," I said. "She told me about the argument she had with her mother, about how guilty she feels over what she said." I paused. "She also told me she wants to be a veterinarian." Something shifted in his expression. "She hasn't mentioned that in months," he said. "Maybe she was afraid you wouldn't approve," I suggested. "Maybe she thought she had to follow in her mother's footsteps." Barrett went quiet, processing that. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "What else did she say?" "She asked if I could make her breakfast," I said. "She mentioned that her mother used to make blueberry pancakes." I watched his face and saw the exact moment when hope finally edged out caution. "She hasn't asked for anything in months," he said quietly. "She's barely been eating." "Would you mind if I cooked for her?" I asked. "For both of you." Barrett hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I have to leave for a business trip this afternoon," he said. "I'll be gone for 5 days." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. He was considering leaving me, this stranger he'd found under a bridge, alone in his house with his vulnerable daughter. "I know exactly how this looks," I said. "I know you don't know anything about me," I said softly. "But I promise you, I would never hurt your daughter." Barrett studied my face for a long moment. "Emma has refused to stay with anyone since her mother died," he said at last. "She won't go to her aunt's, won't accept help from any of our friends. But if she's willing to talk to you—" "You don't have to decide anything yet," I said. "Let me make breakfast first. See how she reacts." Barrett nodded slowly. "All right. But Marion, if I come back and she's worse instead of better, this arrangement ends immediately." I heard the warning beneath his words, and I didn't blame him. But I also knew something he didn't, that Emma was ready to start healing. She just needed someone to show her how. What he couldn't know was that helping his daughter might be the first step in healing me, too. Barrett was supposed to return from his business trip on Friday evening. Instead, he walked through the front door at 3 in the afternoon, his face etched with exhaustion. And something else. Worry. I was in the kitchen with Emma, flour dusting our clothes as we worked on a batch of chocolate chip cookies. It was the 4th day of his absence, and Emma had eaten 3 full meals a day. She'd even laughed that morning when I dropped a whole egg onto the floor. "Dad?" Emma looked up from the mixing bowl, surprised but not unhappy. "You're home early." Barrett's gaze moved from her to me, taking in the scene. The warm, messy kitchen, ingredients scattered across the counter, bowls piled in the sink, the smell of cookies in the oven. "I finished the meetings ahead of schedule," he said, but I could tell that wasn't the whole story. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" he asked. Emma actually smiled. "Good. Marion's been teaching me how to make real cookies, not the kind that come in a tube." "I can see that," Barrett replied. His voice was neutral, but his eyes kept flicking back to me. Something was off. "Why don't you go wash up?" I suggested to Emma. "We can finish the cookies after you change." Emma nodded and headed upstairs, leaving Barrett and me alone. The easy warmth of a moment ago shifted into a taut, charged silence. "We need to talk," Barrett said quietly. My stomach dropped. "Of course." He walked over to the island and leaned against it, instinctively putting distance between us. "I've been doing some thinking while I was away," he said. "About you, about this situation." I started wiping crumbs from the counter, just to give my hand something to do. "What kind of thinking?" "The kind where I try to figure out who you really are," he replied, his tone careful and controlled. "You show up in my life in the middle of a storm. You connect with my daughter in ways no one else has. You clearly know your way around a kitchen." I kept cleaning, not trusting my voice. "So I made some calls," he continued. "Did some digging." He paused. "Marion Davies, 62 years old, widowed 6 years ago, former cook for several families in the area." The rag went still in my hands. Davies was David's surname, the one I'd taken when we married. If Barrett had pulled my employment history, he'd have seen it all, including the Barrett household from 15 years ago. "The Barrett family," he said slowly. The name hung between us like a verdict. I finally forced myself to look up. Recognition was in his eyes now, and something else I couldn't quite read. Anger? Betrayal? "You knew," Barrett said. It wasn't a question. "I knew," I whispered. "When you saw this house, when I told you my name, you knew exactly who I was." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Barrett dragged a hand through his hair, the same nervous gesture he'd had at 19. "So what is this?" he demanded. "Some kind of con? Are you here for money?" "No." The word came out sharp and instinctive. "Never. This isn't about money." "Then what is it about?" His voice rose slightly. "You appear out of nowhere, move into my home, earn my daughter's trust. And for what? What do you want from me?" I set the cloth down, my hands trembling. This was never how I pictured this moment. I thought I'd have more time. I thought maybe he'd never need to know. "I need to tell you something," I said quietly, "about why I left your parents' employment 15 years ago." Barrett's expression hardened. "I'm listening." I took a deep breath, trying to shape the truth into words that wouldn't destroy everything. "My son," I began, "the one I told you about last night, Hugo, he's 37. A small frown creased Barrett's forehead. "What does your son have to do with—" "He was born 9 months after I stopped working for your family," I said. The silence that followed felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I watched as the math clicked into place, as realization dawned in his eyes. "No," he breathed. "I never meant for it to happen," I said. "You were home from college that summer. Your parents were gone so often, my marriage was falling apart." "No," Barrett repeated, shaking his head, backing away from me. "That's impossible." I reached into my purse and pulled out the same DNA results I had shown Hugo, my hands shaking as I held them out. "I had the test done 3 months ago," I said. I needed to be certain before I told him. Barrett stared at the papers like they might explode. "Hugo is my son," he said slowly. "Yes. And you never told me." His voice broke, thick with hurt. "You let me live my entire life not knowing I had a son." The pain in his words sliced straight through me. "I wanted to tell you," I said, "but your parents made it very clear I was just the help. When I quit, they were relieved. You were 20, just starting your life." I'd been 32 and married. At the time, disappearing had felt like the least damaging option, for everyone. "Better for everyone?" Barrett repeated, incredulous. "You decided what was better for everyone? You decided I didn't have the right to know I had a son. You were just a kid? I was an adult, Marion." He slammed his hand against the counter and I flinched. I was old enough to make my own decisions about my own child. His accusation hit me like a punch, because it was true. I had made that choice for him, just like I'd chosen to lie to David, just like I'd spent my life making decisions out of fear instead of courage. "You're right," I said quietly. "I made choices that weren't mine to make. I was scared and young, and I told myself I was protecting everyone." "Protecting everyone?" Barrett let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "You protected everyone except the child you kept from knowing his real father." I thought of Hugo's face when I told him the truth, the way he'd looked at me like I was a stranger. "Hugo hates me now," I said. "When I told him about you, he threw me out of his life." "Good for him." The words landed like a slap. "Barrett, don't say my name like we're friends," he snapped, holding up a hand, "like you have any right to that kind of familiarity after what you've done." I wanted to talk about his parents' pressure, the looming threat of scandal, the way his father had looked at me when I gave notice, like I was something dirty that needed to be removed quietly. But none of that would undo what I'd done. None of it would give him back the 37 years he'd lost with his son. "Where is he now?" Barrett asked, his voice tight. "Hugo. Where does he live?" "About 20 minutes from here," I said. "But Barrett, you should know. He's struggling. He's always had problems with identity, with anger. Learning about you might not go the way you're hoping." "That's my decision to make, isn't it?" Barrett's eyes were icy. "Or are you planning to take that choice away from me too?" Before I could answer, Emma's voice floated down from upstairs. "Marion, are the cookies ready?" Barrett and I locked eyes, both of us instantly aware that we weren't the only people affected by this conversation. Emma, who'd finally started eating, laughing, talking. Emma, who had no idea that the woman she'd trusted all week carried a secret that could blow her life apart. "She can't know," Barrett said quietly. "Not yet. Not until I figure out what to do about this." I nodded. "What do you want me to do?" He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw clenched, emotions battling behind his eyes. "I want you to pack your things and leave tonight," he said. The words felt like a sentence being passed. "But Emma will be fine," he cut in. "She was improving before you came, and she'll keep improving after you're gone." I wanted to protest, to remind him that she hadn't eaten a proper meal in weeks before I arrived, that she'd spoken more about her mother in 5 days with me than in 6 months with anyone else, but I'd forfeited the right to argue with him a long time ago, back when I chose his future for him without his consent. "Can I at least say goodbye to her?" I asked. "Explain why I'm leaving?" Barrett considered it. "You can tell her you found other arrangements," he said, "that this was always temporary." It wasn't the full truth, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. My time there had always been temporary. I'd just hoped it would last longer than 5 days. "Marion?" Emma appeared in the doorway, looking between us with growing unease. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart," Barrett said, his tone carefully controlled. "Marion was just telling me she's found a more permanent place to stay." "You're leaving?" Emma asked, her face falling. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I am, but you've made such wonderful progress this week. Your father is so proud of you." "I thought," Emma swallowed, "I thought you might stay longer. We were going to work on Mom's blueberry pancake recipe tomorrow." My heart twisted. She'd finally let someone in, and now I was abandoning her, another adult walking away when she needed stability the most. "I'll write the recipe down for you," I said gently, "and you can call me if you need help with it." Emma glanced at her father, picking up on the tension between us. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked. No, sweetheart, Barrett said softly. His voice gentled the way it always did for her. You've done everything right. Sometimes adult situations are just complicated, and they have nothing to do with you. Emma nodded, but I saw it, the way the light dimmed in her eyes, the way the walls slid back into place. In a matter of seconds, some of the progress we'd fought for all week was already slipping away. An hour later, my bag was packed, and I was standing by the front door, waiting for the cab Barrett had called. Emma had hugged me goodbye, really hugged me, tight and trembling, before retreating to her room. Marion. I turned at the sound of Barrett's voice, a flicker of hope rising that maybe, just maybe, he'd changed his mind. I need Hugo's address, he said. Of course, he wasn't reconsidering my place in the house. He was moving toward the son he'd never known existed. Of course, I said. I wrote Hugo's address and phone number on a slip of paper and handed it to him. Our fingers brushed, and for a brief second, I saw the young man I'd known 15 years earlier, confused, wounded, trying to do the right thing in a situation that felt impossibly wrong. For what it's worth, I said quietly, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know I regret how I handled this, all of it. Barrett looked down at the paper, then back at me. I don't know if I can forgive you, he said, but I understand why you did it. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't complete condemnation either. It was more grace than I had any right to expect. The cab horn sounded outside. I picked up my small suitcase, the same one I'd been dragging when Barrett found me under the bridge 5 days earlier. Take care of Emma, I said. She's stronger than she thinks. Barrett nodded, but he didn't say goodbye. He just stood in the doorway and watched as I walked to the cab, climbed in, and shut the door. No goodbye, no last word. I had no idea where I was going or what I would do next. As we pulled away, I glanced back. Barrett was still there, framed in the doorway, Hugo's address clenched in his hand. In a few hours, I knew he would probably drive to my son's house and introduce himself. Hugo would finally learn that the father he'd wondered about for years was a successful businessman who lived just 20 minutes away. Barrett would discover he had a son who was furious, wounded, and wanted nothing to do with family. And I would be alone again, having lost both of them in the span of a week. But at least the truth was out. At least Barrett and Hugo had a chance to know each other, even if that chance had come 37 years too late. 3 weeks after leaving Barrett's house, I was living in a tiny efficiency apartment on the other side of town. It was clean but bare. A bed, a cramped kitchenette, a single window looking out over a parking lot. Nothing like the cozy guest room I'd briefly called home, but it was mine. I'd found work at a local diner on the morning shift. The pay barely covered rent and groceries, but it kept my hands busy and gave me a reason to get out of bed. The other waitresses were kind enough, though I could tell they wondered why a woman my age was starting her life over from scratch. I tried not to dwell on Barrett and Emma, but they slipped into my thoughts constantly. Every morning when I made my coffee, I wondered if Emma was eating breakfast. Every night, unlocking my door to an empty apartment, I wondered if she was still talking to her father or if she'd retreated back into silence. I tried even harder not to think about Hugo, and failed. Had Barrett reached out? Had they met? The questions kept me awake, staring at the ceiling, inventing conversations I would never hear. That's why, when my phone rang on a Tuesday evening and Barrett's name lit up the screen, I just stared at it for 3 rings before finally answering. Hello? Marion. His voice sounded tired, strained. I need to talk to you. My heart lurched. Is Emma okay? Emma's fine, he said. This is about Hugo. I sank down onto my small couch. You contacted him. I went to his house last Saturday, Barrett said. He wasn't exactly receptive. I could picture it. Hugo had been volatile long before he knew the truth about his father. Discovering there was a man out there who'd never been told he existed would not have softened him. What happened? I asked. Barrett was silent for a moment. He told me exactly what he thinks of mothers who keep secrets and fathers who abandon their children. Then he slammed the door in my face. "I'm so sorry," I said quietly. "I should have warned you he's been angry for a long time. Finding out about you just gave him a new target." "That's not why I'm calling," Barrett said, his tone going controlled, almost clinical. "I'm calling because of something he said before he shut the door." I waited, my chest tight. "He said," Barrett continued slowly, "if you really want to know what kind of woman she is, ask her about the night I got arrested." My blood ran cold. Hugo had sworn he would never tell anyone about that night. It had been 3 years ago, and we'd agreed it would stay between us. "Marion," Barrett said gently now, "what happened the night Hugo was arrested?" I closed my eyes, feeling another secret settle on my shoulders like a lead weight. "It's complicated," I said. "I have time," he replied. I drew in a long breath, searching for a place to begin. 3 years ago, Hugo was in a very bad place," I said. "He'd lost his job, he was drinking too much, getting into fights. One night he called me, drunk, furious, saying he was going to do something stupid." I paused, remembering the sick terror in my chest as I'd driven to his apartment. "I went over," I continued, "and found him loading David's old hunting rifle. He said he was going to rob a convenience store, said he was sick of being broke and powerless." I heard Barrett inhale sharply on the other end of the line. "I tried to talk him out of it," I said, "but he was beyond reason, so I made a choice." My voice wavered. I told him that if he was determined to rob someone, he should rob me instead. "You what?" Barrett demanded. "I emptied my bank account," I said. "About $3,000. I put it in front of him and told him it was everything I had. If he needed money that badly, he could take it from me instead of throwing his life away for it." "And that worked?" Barrett asked. "For about 20 minutes," I said. Then he sobered up just enough to realize what he'd almost done. He called the police on himself. Barrett was silent for so long, I thought we'd lost the connection. "He called the police on himself?" he repeated finally. "He said he couldn't live with knowing he'd robbed his own mother, even if I'd given him the money," I said. "So he confessed to attempted armed robbery and turned himself in. But because I'd handed him the cash—" I let out a humorless little laugh. "Try explaining that to a 22-year-old officer." "They arrested him," Barrett said slowly. "And you." "They arrested Hugo for attempted robbery," I confirmed, "and they arrested me as an accessory because I'd enabled the crime by providing the money." I heard him processing, fitting the pieces together. "What happened after that?" he asked. "We spent the night in jail," I said. "Eventually the DA dropped the charges, said it was too messy to prosecute and technically no crime had actually been committed, but Hugo never forgave himself, or me." "He blamed you for his arrest?" Barrett asked. "He blamed me for letting things get that bad," I said. "He told me that if I'd been a better mother, if I'd taught him how to cope properly, he never would have even thought about robbery." I let out a bitter little laugh. "He wasn't entirely wrong." "Marion, that's not the—" Barrett began. "That's not the point," I cut in. "Hugo has been dragging that shame around for 3 years. Finding out about you and about the lies I told just confirmed what he already believed about me, that I'm the kind of person who makes terrible decisions and hurts the people she loves." Barrett was quiet for a while. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than it had been since the day he learned the truth about Hugo. "The night I found you under the bridge," he said, "you told me you had family troubles." "Hugo had just thrown me out," I admitted. "I finally told him about you and he decided he was done with me, so when you brought me home, yes, I was homeless." It was humiliating to say out loud, but there was no point in hiding anything anymore. "And you knew who I was," Barrett continued, "but you didn't say anything because you didn't want to complicate my life." "I didn't say anything because I was a coward," I said quietly. "Because I knew that once you knew the truth, you'd hate me. Just like Hugo does." There was another long pause. "Emma's been asking about you," Barrett said. The shift in topic threw me. "What?" "Every day since you left," he said. "She wants to know if you're okay, where you're staying, whether you're eating enough." His voice held a note of weary affection. "She made me promise to check on you." My chest tightened at the thought of Emma worrying about me. "Is she doing all right?" I asked. "Is she still eating?" "She's better than she was," he replied, "but not as good as she was when you were here. She's been cooking some of the recipes you taught her, but she doesn't eat much of what she makes." "She needs time," I said. "Grief doesn't move in a straight line." "I know," Barrett sighed. "Her therapist says the same thing." He hesitated. "She also says Emma formed a healthy attachment to you, one that was important for her healing." I still wasn't sure where Barrett was heading with all this. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I might have been too quick to ask you to leave," he said. "I let my anger about the past get in the way of what was best for Emma." Hope flickered in my chest, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "Barrett, I understand why you don't trust me," I said. "I've given you every reason not to." "You have," he agreed. "But I've had 3 weeks to sit with this, and I keep landing on the same thought. You made a mistake 38 years ago. A big one. It hurt people, and it's still echoing through all our lives. But that doesn't make you a bad person, Marion. It makes you someone who tried to protect the people she loved, even when you did it the wrong way." Tears burned in my eyes. "I never meant to hurt anyone." "I know," he said quietly. "And I think Hugo does too, underneath all that anger. He's just not ready to admit it yet." "So what now?" I asked. Barrett was silent for a moment. I could hear Emma's voice faintly in the background, calling something to him. "Now," he said, "I ask if you'd be willing to come back, not as a guest passing through, but as someone who cares about Emma and wants to help her heal." "What about Hugo?" I asked. "He's your son too. He has a right to have a relationship with you." "Hugo will come around when he's ready," Barrett said, "or he won't. But I can't put my relationship with Emma on pause while I wait for him to work through his anger." I thought about my tiny apartment, my job at the diner, the dull ache of loneliness that had followed me everywhere for the past 3 weeks. Then I pictured Emma's smile when she pulled cookies out of the oven, the way she'd clung to me when we said goodbye. "What would Emma think about me coming back?" I asked. Barrett let out a small, genuine laugh. "It was her idea," he said. "She told me maybe you need a family just as much as she needs someone who understands what it's like to lose the people you love, out of the mouths of teenagers." Emma, in her 17-year-old wisdom, had seen what we hadn't. We weren't just helping each other, we were helping ourselves. "I'd like that," I said softly. "I'd like to come back." "There's one condition," Barrett said. My heart dipped. "What condition?" "No more secrets," he said. "If something happens with Hugo, if you hear from him, if you get news about him, you tell me. We handle things together, as a family. No more trying to protect each other by hiding the truth." "Agreed," I said. "And, Marion," he added, "I want you to think of this as your home, not just a stopgap solution. Emma needs stability, and honestly, so do you." Before I could answer, I heard Emma's voice louder in the background. "Did you ask her? Is she coming home?" Home. The word hit me so hard I had to swallow before answering. Barrett's house, our house, could be my home, not just a place where I was waiting for the next disaster. "Tell Emma I'll be there tomorrow," I said, smiling through my tears. After we hung up, I sat in my small apartment and looked around at the handful of belongings I'd collected. A few changes of clothes, some books, the old photos of Hugo I'd brought with me when he threw me out. Tomorrow I'd pack all of it again and go back to Barrett's house. Back to Emma, who needed proof that love didn't have to be perfect to be real. Back to Barrett, who was slowly learning that family isn't only about blood or history, it's about the people who choose to show up and stay. Maybe someday Hugo would see that he had a father who wanted to know him and a mother who, despite all her failures, had never stopped loving him. But even if he never did, I would still have Emma and Barrett. I would still have a family that chose me, not out of obligation, but out of want. For the first time in years, that felt like enough. 6 months later, I was in the kitchen preparing Thanksgiving dinner when the doorbell rang. Emma was upstairs getting ready. She'd invited her friend Sarah over, the first time she'd wanted anyone to visit since her mother died. Barrett was in his study, finishing some work before the holiday. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to the door, expecting Sarah or maybe a delivery driver. Instead, I opened it and found myself face to face with Hugo. He looked thinner than the last time I'd seen him. His clothes were rumpled and his eyes had the hollow look of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. For a moment, neither of us said a word. "Mom," he said finally, his voice quiet and unsure. "Hugo." I gripped the doorframe to keep my knees from buckling. "How did you know I was here?" "I've been keeping track," he said. "I know Barrett came to see me. I know you've been living here." He shifted awkwardly. "I need to talk to you." A part of me wanted to shut the door, to protect myself from another round of anger and rejection. But this was my son, and no matter what had happened between us, I still loved him. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. Hugo walked in slowly, taking in the warmth of the house, the smell of roasting turkey, the echo of Emma's laughter from upstairs, the framed photos on the table that now included me, Barrett, and Emma together. "You look good," he said awkwardly. "Healthy." "Thank you." I led him into the living room, my heart hammering in my chest. "How have you been?" Hugo sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clenched together. "Terrible, if I'm honest. I've been thinking about what you told me, about Barrett, about everything." I settled into the chair across from him, leaving space between us. "And I realized," he continued, looking up at me with eyes full of tears, "I've been angry at the wrong person." I held my breath. I didn't dare hope. "I've been furious at you for keeping secrets," Hugo said, "but I never stopped to think about why you felt you had to." He swallowed hard. "I went to Dad's grave last week," he said, his voice shaking. "I sat there for hours thinking about how much he loved me, how he never once treated me like I wasn't his son, even if a part of him suspected the truth." Tears were running down my face. "He loved you so much, Hugo," I whispered. "That was never a lie." "I know," he said, "and I know you loved him too. You gave up any chance of being with my biological father because you didn't want to hurt Dad." He wiped at his eyes. "I've been punishing you for being loyal to the man who raised me." "You had every right to be angry," I said softly. "No, I didn't." Hugo's voice was firm now. "I had a right to be hurt, confused, maybe disappointed that you waited so long to tell me, but I didn't have the right to throw you out of my life like you were nothing." The silence that followed was thick with years of pain and things neither of us had known how to say. "I miss you, Mom," Hugo said, his voice cracking. "I miss having you in my life. I miss being able to call you when I'm scared or confused or just need to hear your voice." I couldn't answer. The lump in my throat was too big. "I know I don't deserve it after the way I treated you," he went on, "but I was hoping maybe we could try again. Start over." Before I could respond, Barrett appeared in the doorway. He must have heard voices and come to see who was there. When he saw Hugo, his expression went carefully blank. "Hugo," he said. His tone was polite, distant. "I wasn't expecting you." Hugo stood, facing the father he'd pushed away months earlier. "I came to see Mom," he said. "But since you're here, I owe you an apology too." Barrett lifted an eyebrow, but stayed quiet. "I was furious when you came to my house," Hugo admitted. "Mad at Mom for keeping secrets. Mad at you for existing. Mad at Dad for being dead." His voice was steady, more grounded than I'd heard it in years. "I took it out on you, and that wasn't fair. You didn't know about me any more than I knew about you." "No, I didn't," Barrett said, stepping farther into the room but still keeping a bit of distance. "But I understand why you were angry. I was angry too." "Are you still angry?" Hugo asked. "At me, I mean." Barrett thought for a moment. "I'm disappointed that I missed 37 years of your life," he said. "I'm sorry your mother felt she couldn't tell me the truth. But angry? No, not anymore." Hugo nodded slowly. Would you be willing to get to know me now? I know it's late, and I know I made a terrible first impression, but I'd like to try. I watched Barrett's face, saw him measure his answer. Then, finally, a small smile appeared. I'd like that too, he said. Dad? Emma's voice floated down from upstairs. Is Sarah here? No, sweetheart, Barrett called back, eyes flicking to me. But we have another guest. He looked at me. Should I introduce them? The question carried a lot more than simple politeness. Was I ready to let Emma into this truth too? Ready to let her see how messy this family really was? Yes, I said. It's time she knew everything. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs in a simple sweater and jeans that made her look even younger than 17. When she saw Hugo, she tilted her head in curiosity. Emma, there's someone I'd like you to meet, Barrett said, gesturing toward him. This is Hugo Davies, Marion's son. Emma walked down the stairs, her gaze moving between Hugo and me. Your son, she asked. But I thought, didn't you say he didn't want to see you anymore? It's complicated, I said gently. Hugo and I had a fight, but we're working things out. Emma studied him for a beat, then surprised us all by walking straight up to him and holding out her hand. I'm Emma Barrett, she said. Marion's been taking care of me since my mom died. Hugo shook her hand, visibly moved by her straightforward kindness. Nice to meet you, Emma. I'm really sorry about your mom. Thank you, she said. She glanced at me with a small smile. Marion's kind of been like a mom to me, too. She taught me how to cook and how to talk about sad things without falling apart. Her simple words hit me like lightning. Emma didn't just like me, she trusted me. She saw me as a mother figure, filling in some small part of what she'd lost. She's good at that, Hugo said quietly. Taking care of people. I forgot that for a while. But I remember now. Barrett cleared his throat. Emma, there's something else you should know about Hugo. She looked between the two of them, sensing something big. Hugo is my son too, Barrett said gently, which makes him your half-brother. Emma's eyes widened. Your son? But how? I took a steadying breath. It's a long story, I said. One that involves mistakes I made a long time ago, but the short version is, Hugo is Barrett's son, and I never told either of them until recently. Emma absorbed that with the quiet resilience I'd come to admire. So, she said slowly, Marion is kind of like Hugo's mom and my stepmom, and Hugo is kind of like my stepbrother? Something like that, Barrett replied with a smile. Emma grinned. Cool. I always wanted a big brother. Hugo laughed, really laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from him in years. Well, I've never had a little sister. This should be interesting. The doorbell rang again. This time it really was Sarah. As Emma introduced her friend to her new family, I felt something settle quietly into place inside me. This wasn't the family I was born into, or the one I'd married into. This was a family we'd deliberately built, out of love, apology, and the willingness to begin again. Later that evening, after Sarah had gone home and Emma was in bed, the three of us, me, Barrett, and Hugo, sat around the kitchen table with coffee and leftover pie. I have something to tell you both, Hugo said, sounding nervous but determined. I've been thinking about what I want to do with my life, about the kind of man I want to be. Barrett and I waited. I want to go back to school, Hugo said. Finish my degree. He turned to Barrett. I was wondering if you'd be willing to help me with that, not just with money. I'd like to get to know you while I figure out what I want to study. Barrett's smile was warm and unguarded. I'd be honored to help, he said. And Mom. Hugo turned to me. I was hoping you'd help me figure out how to be a better man, he said. The kind of man Dad would have been proud of. I reached across the table and took his hand. David was always proud of you, Hugo, I said softly. Even when you couldn't see it. I know that now, he replied, squeezing my hand. I just don't want to waste any more time being angry about things I can't change. We sat there talking about the future, about Hugo's plans for school, about Emma's upcoming college applications, about the Thanksgiving traditions we wanted to start as a family. And I thought of the woman I'd been 6 months earlier, lying under a bridge in a storm. That woman had been crushed under 37 years of secrets. She'd been rejected by her son, with no home, no family, no future she could imagine. Now I was sitting at a kitchen table surrounded by people who chose me. Emma, who saw me as a mother. Barrett, who'd moved past anger and offered me not just shelter but a place in his life. Hugo, who had found his way back and wanted to build something new. I'd spent so long believing that family was about blood and obligation, but this family was built on something deeper. It was about showing up for one another, even when it was uncomfortable. About forgiveness and second chances, and the courage to love imperfectly. As I looked at the three of them, my son, the man I'd once wronged, and the girl who'd let me into her broken heart, I understood something important. I thought I'd been rescuing Emma, helping her survive her grief. I thought Barrett had rescued me from homelessness and despair. But the truth was, we'd all saved each other. "What are you thinking about?" Barrett asked, noticing the faraway look on my face. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am for second chances," I said, "for forgiveness, for a family that chooses to love you." Emma reached across and squeezed my other hand. "We're grateful for you too," she said. "All of us." Hugo nodded. "I know I gave you every reason to give up on me," he said. "But you never did. Not even when I gave up on myself." "That's what mothers do," I said quietly. "We love our children even when they make it hard. Even when we make mistakes too." Barrett lifted his coffee mug. "To family," he said. "Not the one we were born into, but the one we choose." We clinked our cups together, laughing at how informal it was. But it felt right. Around that kitchen table, where Emma and I had baked countless cookies, where Barrett and I had slowly rebuilt trust, where Hugo was learning to belong to something bigger than his own pain, it felt perfect. Outside, the first snow of the season had begun to fall. Inside, we were warm, safe, and wrapped in a love that had been tested and proven strong enough to endure. I was 62 years old, and I was finally home. Now I'm curious about you, the one who listened to my story. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever lived through something similar? Share it in the comments below. I'd love to read your story. And before you go, on the final screen, I'm leaving 2 more of the channel's favorite stories. Click on them. They'll definitely surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until the end.